So just a little bit of information about the Toolbox series if you're unfamiliar. This is a quarterly webinar series hosted by the Puget Sound Regional Council. I'm Katie Enders, an associate planner here, and it's my privilege to get to coordinate a lot of these sessions. We bring together a lot of experts from across our region and beyond. We talk about best practices and resources for local planning, implementation. You can always reach out to me if you have ideas for sessions or if there's anything that you're really hoping we could cover in a session like this. Before we dive into our topic today, I did want to give a little preview about what will be coming up at our next session. We're going to host a session that's focused on local economic development efforts. So that's going to be taking place September 25th. And I'm really excited about this session. We're working on getting this organized for you. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and informative look at our region's economic development efforts. Really interesting for the folks on this call, PSRC is also hosting a virtual launch for a new tool that we've developed. So I think this is really a perfect fit to be announcing at this webinar. On July 22nd, we'll be launching the Build Here Puget Sound, which is a housing data and policy platform tool. So this tool is going to be bringing together information on zoning, developable land inventory, feasibility analysis, and parcel level housing projections. And this tool covers our 4-county region here in the central Puget Sound. So King, Kitsap, Pearson, Snohomish counties. We're inviting planners, housing advocates, elected officials, developers, everybody to really attend this virtual launch that's going to be happening. There will be a demo and a chance for you to ask some questions. So once I'm done sharing my screen here in a moment, I will drop a link in the chat so you can register for that event. I also wanted to go over a couple of logistics. If you have any questions, which we really encourage during this webinar, you'll see that there's a Q&A button. If we have time between presenters, we'll be able to answer a couple of quick questions, and then we have some time set aside at the end of the webinar. So really encourage you to ask any questions you have in the chat. And you will also be eligible to earn an AICP credit if you are looking for one of those. So I'll have more information at the end of the webinar. We also have session resources that are available. So this is another link that I'll be dropping in the chat here in just a minute. We have a handout that we put together that covers not only some of the case studies you'll be hearing about today, but it also includes additional information if you're interested to keep learning about this topic. And we are also recording the webinar, so that recording will be available within a couple of days. Now to our main event for the program today. Really excited to have one of my colleagues, David Dixon from PSRC. He's on our growth management team. He's going to kick us off with some information. And then we have Kimberly Hendrickson from the city of Poulsbo, Amanda Judd from the city of Kirkland, and then Mary Jane Brell Vujovic, who is from Snohomish County. So really excited for you to hear from all 4 of these speakers. Then, like I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and then I'll wrap us up and we'll be on our way by 11:30. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will ask David to come online and kick us off. Oh, David, you are muted.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Katie. Really excited to be here today, sharing this work with you all. So, yeah, um, I am glad to be here to uplift the important work that cities and counties in our region are doing, in particular to address community needs around homelessness through housing and supportive services. This isn't a space that PSRC is typically occupied, so I'll spend a little time this morning relating it to some of our other work and setting the stage for our presenters. So PSRC has historically worked in a housing space. In following Vision 2050, our regional plan, we adopted a regional housing strategy in 2022, which groups some policies and actions for at the regional, state, and local level that we're working towards in three main areas. And we call these our three S's. First, supply, building more housing, stability, making sure that people can stay in their housing, and subsidy, really providing the funding sources to allow those other two things to be successful. And in addition to that, we provide some annual updates on the region's key housing indicators. And we've, over the last couple of years, tried to share some information on homelessness and help shift folks' focus and understanding towards this portion, this critical part of the housing spectrum. And shelter and supportive housing in particular cut across all three of these elements of our regional housing strategy. So we really see this as an important way to bring awareness of what implementation looks like for folks in this space. I'll start today by sharing some data to contextualize our situation and then hand it over to our presenters to share their perspectives. So first off, looking at homelessness in the PSRC region, we've seen that my colleague Eric just shared some of this data with our boards last month, illustrating the significant rise in homelessness across our region. Just in 10 years, the population experiencing homelessness nearly doubled. And in particular, one of the things that we saw was unsheltered homelessness, shown in orange here, has almost tripled since 2015. This is the most visible type of homelessness, and also it is the most vulnerable way to experience homelessness. So it is really incumbent on our region through uh, local governments, planners, as well as other types of service providers to help house and provide services for the people who need it most. Um, so fortunately, I can say across the region, we are making important progress towards addressing these needs. As a result of the county uh, local comprehensive plans, jurisdictions collectively are planning for um, over 80,000 permanent supportive housing units, as well as 77,000 emergency housing beds. These are collective targets for growing these types of housing. Of course, these are targets that are set in the local comprehensive plans. It uh, requires a lot more funding and intention to actually get these types of units built. So that's why I wanted to invite some of the folks from across our region today to talk about what it looks like to implement and make it happen. Um, we have seen that there's some uh, promising results in the region, showing that on the left, some growing numbers of emergency housing as well as permanent supportive housing shown on the right, increasing in many of the counties in our region. Um, However, there is some concern that with the expiration of some of the pandemic recovery funding, that these numbers might not be able to be sustained. Um, in addition, some of the things that I wanted to highlight today is that we have some uncertainty around regulation, legislation, and funding. Um, One of the major programs, the Federal Continuum of Care funding, there's some legal uncertainty around the issuance of this annual funding program. Uh, those funding has been delayed, and in particular, a reduction in funding for permanent housing, that permanent supportive housing that we've seen a lot grow quite significantly in our region is imperiled. And so significant concern at the federal level in funding this work. Um, However, in the state level, there's been a lot of work to allow these types of housing, shelters, supportive housing, transitional housing, to expand and be developed throughout our region. So, in particular, this bill that just passed in the 2026 session expands the areas in cities and counties where shelters and supportive housing must be permitted. So, with that, I'd like to leave you all, as well as the presenters, with some questions to think about and hopefully address during our presentations today. In particular, what is local government's role in supportive housing and homelessness services? How do you think about it? How do you work with community members and service providers to achieve positive outcomes? And how do you build support both among community members, elected officials, and understanding for the need for shelters and supportive housing? So with that, I will hand it over to Kim Hendrickson from the City of Paulsbo to start our presentations.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate you setting that context. And yes, like David mentioned, we're really happy to welcome Kimberly Hendrickson, who is the Housing, Health, and Human Services Director from the City of Paulsbo, to kick us off. Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here today because I come with a message that I don't think we hear often enough, which is little cities actually do have the tools, if they have the will, to do something meaningful to address homelessness, not only in their cities, but in their regions. For those of you that are not familiar with the city of Paulsbo, we're 13,000 strong. We have our own Housing, Health, and Human Services department, and we are making headway in addressing homelessness. We have a ways to go. We're learning our way through this process, but I'm here to be a living example that little cities can and should be a part of this conversation and can do very meaningful things for their residents. As I mentioned, I'm the Director of Housing, Health, and Human Services. I might be speaking sometimes about me and what I do, but I want to say at the outset, the reason we're able to do so much positive and impactful work in Paulsbo is because we're led by a current mayor and a former mayor that took health and human services and affordable housing extremely seriously. We've got a very supportive city council, an adept and wise city manager, a city administrator that's able to guide our department through a lot of really complicated issues. To have a little city be able to succeed in this area can never be because of a person or a department. It's a shared interest and commitment to doing more for housing, health, and human services. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to make a presentation that's going to last about 20 minutes. Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, I can convey successfully some of the lessons that we've learned over the past few years in Paulsbo. The first I've already mentioned, small cities can reduce homelessness, but we have a lot of disadvantages in this space. So it really requires dedicated staff that's focused on this topic, dedicated funding, not just grant funding, and strong partnerships, both within government and with the external community. And I really like, David, one of your questions, which is how you work not only with community, but with service partners, because those sorts of relationships are just so critical. The other point I want to make sure to make today is that homelessness is a very complex problem because human beings are very complex. There is no single approach or solution, and anybody that comes into this space thinking that there's a magic bullet or a simple way to address homelessness, particularly unsheltered homelessness. My final point that I hope to make today is that services are absolutely critical to getting people housed. Housing, but none of that is a supportive community, a place where people feel comfortable and can go outside of services and outside of housing to get the support that they need. Okay, so my department, Housing, Health, and Human Services, we're very young. We were formed during the pandemic. We consider matters related to the health and well-being of Poulsbo residents, always with an emphasis on our vulnerable populations. Typically, that means people that are low income, but it can also easily mean folks that are aging in place and need extra help, folks that are struggling with disabilities, old, young, in between. We like to use the word vulnerable because it gives us a bit of a broad reach to understand the difference and changing needs for our community. We were added to the city in 2020 during the pandemic. As I mentioned before, we've had a previous mayor and now a current mayor that are very committed to helping our low income and struggling residents. Our former mayor, Becky Erickson, was extremely instrumental in making sure that there was a focused place within city government during the pandemic where people would go looking for help, couldn't find it, but at least had a number to call in the city to get some guidance about where to go and what to do. Back to Mayor Erickson taught me a long time ago that while it's terrific to have partnerships and critical to work with the state and the county, cities, even little cities, have to take the responsibility of providing health and human services because we can't always rely on others to take care of our internal problems. COVID was a terrible time, but also a very educational time for me in seeing, again, how much a little city can do to push out vaccinations, help people that are in their homes and can't or won't go out, coordinate different approaches. Wouldn't go back to those times for anything, but I think that was a really important philosophical shift for many of us in the city to understand that the little city of Poulsbo has an obligation to address needs that aren't being met elsewhere in emergency situations. Even though the department was formed in 2020, it really took off in 2021 for a couple of reasons. House Bill 1220 and its new requirements for cities, even little cities, to plan for and accommodate deeply affordable housing. That new emphasis in all of our comprehensive plans to do step housing, shelter, transitional housing, emergency housing, permanent supportive housing. All of a sudden with 1220, conversations were being had and had to start in the city about the importance of very low income housing at that 30% and below AMI threshold. Also happening in 2021 was a new revenue option that I'll talk about now. Substitute House Bill 1220 created that language of step housing, but in addition, our momentum was really kicked off by House Bill 1590 that allowed the city of Poulsbo to pass a 0.1% tax for affordable housing, but not just affordable housing. So I'm showing you now the RCW that came out of 1590. I know this call has many local government folks and planners, so I apologize for saying something that you're already familiar with. But to me, the real intelligence of this law and the impact of this law is that it allows local jurisdictions to use up to 40% of these local dollars for affordable housing to be used for the operation, delivery, or evaluation of behavioral health treatment programs and services, or more broadly, housing-related services. And what that means for us in Poulsbo is if we're bringing in, give or take, $700,000 a year, that leaves, more than $200,000 that we can set aside for behavioral health services. And I'll talk a little bit soon about what we've chosen to do with those funds. So again, I think what really got H3, or the Housing, Health, and Human Services Department, on strong footing was not only that moral obligation that city officials felt to do something for people struggling during the pandemic, but also new obligations through 1220 to develop deeply affordable housing and a local funding source that allowed us to spend money on affordable housing, but also on behavioral health services. David mentioned the housing targets that are now showing up in our comprehensive plans to show what the needs are for that step housing, that housing under 30%. When we started looking at numbers here in Poulsbo, they were quite astounding. Again, we're a little city, we're 13,000 people, and we have allocations to produce, if you look at the chart on the right, in the next 40 years, 377 units of 30% AMI below non-permanent supportive housing, 166 units of permanent supportive housing, emergency housing down at the bottom, which we consider, that entry point for people coming out of homelessness. We have an obligation to create 83 slots for folks using that kind of emergency housing. If you look at the bottom of the screen, at the moment, our current supply of emergency housing is zero, right? Our current supply of permanent supportive housing is zero. We've got a long way to go. And as a little city with very limited funding streams, and very clear limits in capacity, these numbers can be quite intimidating. Okay, back to housing, health, and human services. So keeping in mind again, the new funding sources and new housing obligations. Really, in the last few years, my department has been incredibly focused on STEP housing. We have a terrific planning director that I know many of you know named Heather Wright. Terrific work is happening in housing, figuring out how to use zoning and other incentives to create missing middle housing or affordable housing at that 60% and above range. But it's clear that there needs to be a department in the city that is laser focused on the need of folks at that 30% and below AMI. So that's a priority area of my department. With that, of course, an obligation to help people transition from homelessness to housed. And now with this new funding source from 1590, increasing access to behavioral health and social services. I'll also say quickly that we work really closely with our prosecutor, our police chief, our police department. I understand that our role in H3 is also to get people out of the criminal justice system that don't need to be there, that are getting arrested for crimes related to homelessness, drug use, mental health issues, low-level misdemeanors that in many cases, not all, are better handled through housing and services as opposed to criminal justice processing. As I mentioned before, we take in about $700,000 a year from our local affordable housing tax. We're using about $280,000 a year for behavioral health services. We do get opioid settlement dollars in the city of Poulsbo. Turns out to be around $30,000 or $40,000 a year. Boy, does that vary depending on the year. And I know that moving forward, some of the upfront funds will be much smaller as time progresses. So it's not a reliable funding source, but it does help. I'm also somewhat adept at grant writing, and thanks to grant opportunities that are available, typically not for the homelessness element of what we do, but for the behavioral health, social services, and housing part of what we do, we're able to bring in some external grant funding. Okay, let's get back to homelessness full on. If a key responsibility for housing, health, and human services is to help people transition from homelessness to being housed, it's important to know at the front end what the scope of the problem is. There was a slide before that showed the logo for Eco Northwest. We commissioned them last year to help us with a study to get a better handle on the number of unsheltered homeless people in our region of North Kitsap. Their estimate is around 200 people, Bainbridge Island, Kingston, Poulsbo, Greater Poulsbo, North Kitsap County. We know from our local point-in-time count that the number within Poulsbo city limits is about 37, more informally or anecdotally, talking to our police department, to our fire department. I know that at any given time, there's between 25 and 40 unsheltered people in Poulsbo, many, if not most, living in their cars. This is a cluttered slide, but it's got some really important information about who we are trying to serve and not just the numbers. It's difficult doing social services in a little city because of limits on resources and capacity. But what makes it incredibly important and when it works incredibly rewarding is that when we have 25 to 40 unsheltered people within our city limits, people like me that are working in this field get a chance to know virtually all of them. The people that are unsheltered in Poulsbo are known to all of us. Police Department, H3, the Recovery Navigator Team, Housing, Health, and Human Services. So there's a lot of familiarity in a small city about who is unsheltered. And I want to share with you just some of the observations that I've been able to make over the last few years. The word I want to keep bringing up is complexity. People that are unsheltered have very dramatically different needs. We're seeing people out there, and maybe this is the stereotype, right, that are in active drug use. They're certainly there. And we're certainly seeing people out there that are struggling with severe mental illness, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia that's being untreated. Those are perhaps the stereotypical folks that are unsheltered, and they're certainly there. But what we're also seeing are people with developmental disabilities, right? Folks with intellectual disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, chronic physical health conditions. We're seeing people that are not working for sure, but also many people that are unsheltered living in their car that are working in very low paying jobs or in unstable positions. There's a trope out there that, people just don't want to have housing that are living unsheltered. Some of that is true. And in fact, if I was going to generalize, I would say that seems to be true in Poulsbo for a lot of younger people, I'll say under 30. But we sure do see a lot of people that are young and over 30 that want to be housed, but they're ineligible for housing. Maybe it's because of a criminal record. Maybe it's because of a sex offense. Maybe it's because of something voluntary, pets that they will not part with no housing available for people that have animals. Again, there are definitely folks in Poulsbo that do not want to come in to shelter or housing, but the vast majority of people that I am seeing can't get into housing because of health conditions, complex behavioral health conditions, or just no housing being available that fits their situation. We do see people that are coming from other jurisdictions. We live very close to Bremerton. We see many people that come in from Bremerton that can't or won't stay there, and I'll say more about that in a second. But there's I'll say disturbing number of people that are unsheltered in Poulsbo that are longtime Poulsbo residents. So again, this trope that, people are coming in. If you build services, people are going to come. The unsheltered people that we're seeing in Poulsbo are a mix of things, and included in that mix are people that went to elementary school in Poulsbo. Life took a wrong turn, and they're now living behind the AM/FM and flying a sign on the street corner. The things that I'm talking about in terms of complexity, and again, I want to stress health conditions, developmental disabilities. We're seeing some of those similar things show up in the PIT count when folks working the count are asking people what their personal characteristics are. Mental health issues, substance use issues are absolutely there. Don't want to sugarcoat that, but so are chronic health conditions, physical disabilities, and situations like fleeing domestic violence. There are no simple solutions here to homelessness. The idea of arresting people to get them off the street, using our ITA laws to detain them to get them off the street, sending people back home, embracing housing first models, all of these ideological absolutist positions don't really work in a small city like Poulsbo where you get to know people and their different needs. Very quickly, I'll talk about Milo, that's not his real name. Came to us in the city of Poulsbo, lifelong resident, life took a wrong turn, married somebody that had some pretty serious mental health conditions, engaged in crime, ended up to jail, came to our department looking for help with housing, couldn't find anything because of the felony on his record. I'll talk about Tom, not his real name, Poulsbo native, attendee of one of our local churches, well-known through the elementary school, middle school, high school, developed schizophrenia later in life, right, in his late teens, not typical. I'm sorry, very typical. Ended up untreated for his mental illness, roaming the streets of Poulsbo for years, with residents calling City Hall constantly because they know Tom, know his family, know his history, and want to know why nothing is being done to put him into housing. Planning is absolutely critical in addressing homelessness. That's something that David said at the front of this call. But housing by itself will not produce needs, housing that fits the needs of somebody with a criminal record that can't get in to affordable housing, somebody like Tom that's got very severe mental illness and has trouble with medication compliance, or somebody like Allison that came to us a couple of weeks ago from Bremerton, fleeing the shelter with a bruise across half of her face because somebody stomped her head. Allison is over 70 years old. Planning is critical, but it won't help people with diverse needs and vulnerabilities that housing alone won't fix. I will also say that creating incentives through planning through waived fees will not work by itself to produce the kind of housing that people like Milo, Allison, and Tom need. There are too many financial disincentives in place. It is just too expensive to mix supports and housing. Developers aren't running to the table to build this sort of housing. And equally, on the nonprofit side, in a little place like Poulsbo, there are some real limitations to what our nonprofits can do. And sadly, a lack of nonprofit capacity to fill the void and create the sort of housing that can be sustainable over the years. Adding to the difficulty, Kitsap County has very limited shelter and supportive housing. There's a 2-year wait for our one permanent supportive housing facility. We're down to now one shelter, which is about an hour bus ride away. Back to our old mayor, Becky Erickson, we have to figure out a way to do this ourselves. We can't depend on the county to help us out of this very troubling situation. What we've done in the city of Poulsbo is not one single approach, but to build a response step by step. It's not just a response to homelessness, it's a response to people that are vulnerable in our community, many of them who happen to be homeless or are struggling with mental health, behavioral health conditions. We started our work in H3 back in 2027 before we were even called H3, figuring out how to partner behavioral health specialists with our police and then fire departments to do more proactive outreach to people struggling on the street and in our homes with behavioral health issues. Through the learning that we gained from working with first responders, and after the establishment of H3, we were able to use that money that I talked about before, coming out of 1590, that 40% for behavioral health services, to open 2 centers in Poulsbo. The first, called a Recovery Resource Center, a little tiny hub where people can come 5 days a week without an appointment to access services that will heighten their chance to get into shelter or housing, connect them to a peer so they can receive peer support and some emotional trying to navigate our terrifically difficult. Have a shower. We have folks on site from the Suquamish tribe that can provide substance use services, a representative from Kitsap Homes of Compassion that can do mental health counseling. Again, we opened up a hub, and that's getting bigger and better all the time as more providers want to be a part of what we're doing. We opened a recovery cafe last year. For those of you that aren't familiar with the model, learn about it. It's wonderful. It's a place where people can come and access free meals, but the meals are the smallest part of it. These are peer-run centers where anybody struggling with recovery can come and find camaraderie, participate in groups and circles and classes and education, but most importantly, start to build community so people can be supporting each other, and the government, City of Poulsbo, can simply step out of the way and just create a forum for people to feel welcomed and supported. We've also done some pretty neat stuff in creating units of housing. Talk about that more in just a second. I continue to work on things like creating ad hoc groups, coalitions. We're going to be issuing a notice of funding opportunity next year to see if we can stimulate some creative thoughts around how to use our affordable housing tax dollars. I'm going to go through this quickly because I only have about a minute left. And I'd be happy to answer questions about this during the Q&A. We were able to use some of our affordable housing dollars, plus some grants, plus there'll be some bonding, to do the city's first affordable housing project designed to help people at that 30% and AMI level. It's called the Nordic Cottages. I am eternally grateful to Heather Wright and our planning department for being such an amazing thought partner and figuring out how we can use planning tools to get this Nordic Cottages built and up there. It also exists because of a partnership with the Housing Authority that was so instrumental in both getting this built and managing the property. We're housing 8 seniors and adults with disabilities who either were homeless or were at risk of homelessness. I hope we can talk about this in the Q&A. This was made much easier by a provision within the Poulsbo Code that allows zoning exceptions for projects that partner with housing authorities. Really interesting, and again, so indebted to Heather for helping me understand the possibilities in this local law. We worked with a local church to start a safe park this year. Very modest. We're a city of 13,000, 5 spots for people that are living in their cars where they can park overnight and be safe and have access to a restroom. City defrays some of the costs. They're de minimis. The church provides the space. And finally, I just want to open the possibility to folks on the call to not just partnering with developers and nonprofits, but for finding for-profit partners in the behavioral health space. We've been working with Gambit Recovery based in Arizona for the past couple of years to open up sober living or recovery residence homes. One is on a city park that they can use in exchange for caretaking services. One is nearby. The city is very happy to supplement some of the costs of these homes, but Gambit charges a rent, manages the housing, gives residents an opportunity to be housing managers. It's a wonderful partnership. Here's some wonderful pictures about the Recovery Cafe. Our city administrator, Rob Gelder, at the loom. Down at the bottom left, you can see our current judge, the county prosecutor, a former city judge, council members being a part of what's happening at the cafe. I think some of the most important thing that we do, and this is back to David's prompting question, we're not only serving people that come into the cafe, but we're giving the broader community a chance to get involved, to get to know people that are vulnerable, that are living unsheltered and homeless, to create connections in our little town. So when we do come forward and have proposals to do more and build more, even build a shelter, we already have a coalition started and people that are committed to doing the right thing for our residents. Okay, I know I'm out of time, so just to sum up, this is in the deck if anybody wants to see it. What can a small city do to reduce homelessness? Definitely invest in behavioral health services, definitely increase the access and supply of shelter and housing, build a culture of communication and cooperation. A city can't do this alone, but most importantly, create a place where people can find acceptance and stability. That Recovery Cafe that we run as a city is building a community that opens the door to change and recovery and camaraderie, not just for our members, but people that come in and are a part of what we're doing. So I apologize for running over. Thanks for letting me share information about Poulsbo.
Kimberly, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. We're starting to get some questions in the Q&A chat, but I think we'll save them for the end at this point, just for the sake of time. But I do encourage people to keep adding your questions there. And at this time, I'm really happy to welcome Amanda Judd onto the call. Amanda is a Human Services Coordinator at the City of Kirkland and really excited to hear about the work that you're doing. So take it away, Amanda.
Thank you, Katie. Give it a couple seconds for my slides to pop up. Okay. Hi, everyone. As Katie said, I'm Amanda Judd. My pronouns are she, her. I'm with the City of Kirkland, a Human Services Coordinator. The city has kind of undergone many initiatives in the areas of attainable housing, reducing homelessness, and supportive services. But for the sake of today's presentation, I'm going to focus on these three areas. So coordinated response, which will include the city's venture into direct service provision, targeted core investments, which I'll do somewhat of a deep dive into our homelessness continuum of care that provides existing funding levels, as well as an action plan that will guide ongoing funding priorities. And lastly, I'm going to highlight the value of regional collaboration by spotlighting a specific example of a permanent supportive housing project that recently opened here in Kirkland. So first, let's look at direct service and coordinated response. The city brought online a homeless outreach coordinator position in early 2023. Prior to that, for a good year or more, we actually attempted to contract that position out through a nonprofit partner. However, we found the community partner had difficulty staffing that role. Staff retention is something that we see our nonprofit partners struggle with quite a bit. Cost of living in this area creates restrictions. So ultimately, we brought that role in-house as a city position that allowed the city to provide salary and benefits incentive to fill the role. And actually, that is a trend that we're seeing, at least regionally here in East King County, with both, with the cities of Bellevue, Redmond, and Issaquah, all creating homeless outreach positions within those respective cities. And I'll go more into that later on in the presentation. But also more recently, we created a housing navigation coordinator role to help offset the work of the homeless outreach coordinator. So the housing navigation coordinator works with individuals to identify available housing resources and assist completing applications and other prep tasks. For those who have never had to go through that process, it is a bear. Like it is really, there are a lot of hoops. There's a lot of steps and there's just a lot of, it's a lot to, one, identify available housing resources, apply, do paperwork. And so we really saw that was a missing gap, in our efforts to help people exit homelessness, was supporting someone through that. So we created that position. They also are able to help folks if they need an ID or assist with move-in costs once housing is identified. Also, in addition to working with actively unhoused residents, we saw a need in the community with our vulnerably housed residents, mostly our seniors who are on fixed incomes and are being priced out of their homes, unfortunately. Most of the seniors, they don't even know where to begin to look for affordable housing. And so that was something that this position was also able to help with, our seniors or other vulnerably housed residents be able to just navigate that system and navigate the process of application. The next kind of coordinated response I'll talk about is our HEART team. So shortly after bringing the homeless outreach coordinator position online in 2023, the city established a homeless assistance and response team, or HEART, consisting of staff members from various departments, and it was modeled after the successful HEART program in Vancouver, Washington. So HEART is designed to provide compassionate, person-centered assistance to residents experiencing homelessness through outreach, case management, and coordination, both interdepartmentally and with local nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and regional partners. HEART's first strategy is to transition individuals back into stable housing through outreach, case management services, provided by both HEART members and our partner agencies in the community. This approach is enormously successful, and by focusing efforts on transitioning individuals back to stable housing, staff often eliminate the need to activate the second strategy. However, in certain circumstances, particularly if there's a public health or a safety concern for the unhoused individual or for other members of the community, staff may need to deploy certain response policies and procedures as a second strategy. Those next steps are determined on a case-by-case basis, that are largely dictated by case law, decriminalizing homelessness and the availability of shelter beds. HEART also serves as a point of contact for community members seeking a response to homelessness. So community members are able to report instances of observed homelessness into a communication portal we call Our Kirkland, and it's established by the city to kind of receive questions and service requests from community members. So once a report is received, attempts at engagement are made, and HEART team members collaborate depending on circumstances of each department. Listed on the screen are just the different roles that are part of the HEART team. Some examples of how they might collaborate to engage and respond include, for example, if there's an encampment identified in a park, the homeless outreach coordinator would kind of co-respond with the park ranger who might be more familiar with the area to help engage, build a relationship, and bridge them to resources. Another common report that we often get, so within the city of Kirkland, there is a former railroad track turned into a walking path. It's called the Cross Kirkland Corridor, and it goes right down the middle of the city, mostly in residential wooded areas. And often people, if they are walking along the path, they might see in a distance in the wooded areas that there may be an encampment set up. They make a report to the city. We kind of identify that area. If that happens to be private property, then our code enforcement would be able to identify the property owner and make contact with that property owner to see if we have permission to go on their property to help engage and bridge that individual to resources. So those are just kind of a couple of examples of how our HEART team members kind of support each other and work collaboratively to kind of identify and support various unique instances and ideally connect folks to resources and back into housing stability. So the second area of focus is targeted core investments made by the city of Kirkland. In the 2025-2026 biennium budget, the Kirkland City Council allocated nearly $6 million to human services grant funding. This includes investments in our continuum of care strategy that includes these areas that you see on your screen. I'll go into a little bit more depth in each of those circles or buckets, but overall want to recognize that and highlight that it isn't always a linear process in supporting stabilized housing. It is often sometimes using the resources that we have and then deploying what is needed. So the first bucket that we're kind of going into detail on is our prevention strategy and the investments that we are making to prevent homelessness. We know and recognize that it is far easier and more cost-effective to prevent someone entering into homelessness than it is to help support someone to exit homelessness once they have experienced it. Those investments include grant funding to local nonprofit organizations to provide rent assistance, utility assistance, or financial assistance. It is often the case that one unexpected hospital bill is the difference between someone being able to pay their rent and being able to maintain stable housing. So being able to have those gap resources in place is very important. We also invest in support, tenant protections, and legal support. We fund one of our nonprofits that we fund is the Eastside Legal Assistance Program. They have a Kirkland-specific housing attorney to support Kirkland renters in any type of conflict that they may have with landlords to ensure they know what their rights are as tenants. And then also various social service programs and systems that help prevent housing to become unstable. The next bucket or area in our continuum is outreach. I kind of went into detail through our homeless outreach coordinator and our HEART team. They also make referrals to our nonprofit organizations that we fund. They provide basic needs distribution. There's also severe weather hotel vouchers. These are an internal resource that is established during severe cold weather when our shelters are at capacity and we do have residents who are unhoused. We want to ensure their safety. And so we're able to utilize hotel vouchers as needed to bring folks inside when it is unsafe. Our third bucket is emergency shelter services. Here in East King County, there is a regional approach to supporting the community. There are several cities on the east side. They do a pooled funding approach. There are pooled contracts that support services on the east side. And no one city can have all of the resources that are needed for individuals. And so, for example, Porch Light is a men's shelter. It is located in Bellevue. Women's shelter, the Sophia Way. The emergency shelter is located in Kirkland. There's a youth shelter, 18 to 25, that used to be located in Redmond. They recently just crossed the city line over into the city of Kirkland. So there is a regional approach of supporting our shelter and day center programs, as well as the navigation services, so case managers that are embedded within those programs. We are noticing, though, that more and more our shelters are often at capacity. I do know Porch Light or Men's Shelter has reported for a significant amount of the men that are there. They are there for at least 100 days, which is not exactly how an emergency shelter is supposed to be set up. And a large part of that is because there isn't anywhere to exit to. So that leads to our next bucket, temporary shelter and housing. That would include transitional housing. We've also included kind of safe parking programs in that bucket. We do have a local church that operates a safe parking program within the city of Kirkland. While there are some transitional housing units, it has kind of fallen out of popularity in the last few years, but we are seeing the impact of limited transitional housing because our shelters are getting kind of backlogged. And then the last bucket is our subsidized permanent housing. And through that, the city supports our localized subsidized affordable housing programs. That's programs like Imagine Housing. They have multiple properties in their portfolio that targets individuals who are 30 to 60% AMI. They also have specific units for folks who are exiting homelessness, specific units for seniors and for veterans. That's just one example. We also incentivize affordable housing for low and moderate income households. Kirkland participates in the ARCH program. For those who may not be familiar, ARCH is a regional coalition for housing, and it is a partnership between King County and the East King County cities focused on preserving and increasing affordable housing for low and moderate income households. And then lastly, supporting King County's Healthier Housing Initiative, which I will get more into that in my third focus area. So, kind of shifting from our continuum of care, in December 2025, the City Council adopted our very first homelessness continuum of care action plan. And that has kind of built off of each other. Like I said, we brought on our homeless outreach coordinator in 2023. With that position, we were really able to understand the breadth of homelessness within our community. And that was through active engagement, actively being out in the community, and really understanding how many folks are unhoused that we weren't aware of, what the missing gaps were, and what is needed. And over the last 3 years, we began to really identify like what was missing. And so our city council did pass a resolution 5641 that authorized our city manager to allocate staff resources. And we basically did a deep dive. We did extensive community engagement with town halls. We worked specifically with certain civic organizations, with our service providers. We engaged with our folks who have lived experience of homelessness. For the better part of a year, we did a lot of engagement, a lot of feedback, a lot of listening sessions, and we ultimately curated a list of where the missing gaps are, where our community felt like the priorities should be. We presented that to City Council, and like I said, it was adopted in 2025. And the purpose ultimately was to prevent homelessness where possible, support unhoused individuals in their transition back to stable housing, and then provide compassionate and dynamic response. Through that, there were 77 actions. I think 35 of those were already existing, and the remaining were new actions that we are going to have as part of our the next 5 to 10 years, working on prioritizing and working toward. And those actions fell within the 5 buckets that I just kind of went through, as well as improving service delivery. Linked to the information that will go out after this presentation is a link to the action plan if you're interested in kind of looking through. It's a beast of a document, but it was very well prepared for and extensively focused on the different action plans that we identified as needed here in Kirkland. So recommend going through that if interested. Okay, so the last focus area I'm going to discuss is regional collaboration by spotlighting a specific example of collaboration with a permanent supportive housing project that recently opened here in Kirkland. And I'm sure it is likely everyone on this call is familiar with what permanent supportive housing is, but if not, I want to go ahead and kind of help familiarize. It is a long-term evidence-based housing model designed for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness who face significant barriers to housing stability, including disabilities or complex health conditions. It combines permanent affordable housing with 24/7 supportive services, allowing residents to hold a standard lease and maintain a stable home while accessing services that help them remain stably housed. So King County launched the Health Through Housing initiative in 2020 to reduce chronic homelessness by creating supportive housing through the acquisition and conversion of hotels and already existing buildings. The initiative is funded through a dedicated 0.1% countywide sales tax authorized by Washington House Bill 1590 that passed in 2020. And it established 17 health through housing sites across King County. So as the municipal host of a health through housing site, the city of Kirkland entered into a permanent supportive housing agreement with King County. That agreement outlined kind of operating procedures or operating framework for the site, including service requirements, accountability measures, and it outlined kind of our partnership responsibilities between the county, us, the city, and the operator, who was Plymouth Housing was chosen as the operator. The agreement also outlines that up to 65% of the units created in that site would be filled with local experiences of homelessness. And I'll share more about that in a minute. So the site was named just this last December. The site was named Sheila Stanton Place to honor a deeply respected Kirkland resident and community advocate who unexpectedly passed in 2025. The naming recognized Ms. Stanton's legacy as a community building, equity, and anti-bias leadership and compassionate service to others. So leading up to the opening of the site, which just opened this last January, the three partners, which is King County, City of Kirkland, and Plymouth Housing, met regularly to coordinate project progress, share updates, and resolve operational questions. The three partners also convened monthly with community stakeholders located near the site to provide updates and gather feedback on draft operational documents. So the stakeholders that we engaged in those community meetings included representatives from nearby businesses, schools, property management groups, and the neighborhood association. So like I said, Sheila Stanton Place began welcoming residents in January. Move-ins are occurring in phases to ensure residents receive comprehensive wraparound support and to align with the construction schedule. So as former hotel rooms are converted into studio apartments with the addition of kitchenettes, as sections of those units are completed, certificates of occupancy are obtained, and then King County Facilities Management Division turns those rooms over to Plymouth Housing staff for deep cleaning and then setting up, including bedding, kitchen supplies, etc. So when fully leased up, Sheila Stanton Place will provide 100 units of permanent supportive housing. Earlier, I mentioned that up to 65% of the units filled with local experiences of homelessness. This is done through a local referral network established by the City of Kirkland, in which we identified our community partners with whom we collaborate with and refer unhoused residents to for services. And so this is what a local referral looks like. So Kirkland's continuum of care is part, like I mentioned earlier, it's part of a regional approach that reflects how people experiencing homelessness kind of transition between neighboring cities to access emergency shelter and social services. Outreach staff across the East Side collaborate. So our homeless outreach coordinator collaborates with the homeless outreach coordinators in the cities of Issaquah, Redmond, Bellevue. They do regular case conferencing. They share information and resources. So when engaging unhoused community members, the city's outreach staff build trust. They explore needs. They make referrals to regional resources. So the city has included those regional resource providers and the Eastside City outreach staff as kind of our local partners that are able to make local referrals to Sheila Stanton Place. And that is the three focus areas that I have to share. Like I said, there are many initiatives that the Kirkland is participating in, but the three that have been most successful are our coordinated response, so being able to respond compassionately from a person-centered perspective, utilizing the different departments and experiences that we have, as well as partnering collaboratively with our nonprofit agencies, our targeted investments that we make within our nonprofit partners to provide the much needed resources and systems to either prevent homelessness from happening or to help stabilize folks once homelessness occurs, and then collaborating regionally both with other nonprofit partners, other East Side cities, or with the county. Again, collectively, we have the same goal, which is to make sure that our residents are safe and stably housed. And so supporting those partnerships and relationships has been very effective. Yeah, I look forward to answering any other questions at the end of the presentation, and thank you all for your time.
Great. Amanda, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I think it's great you ending with that example that included your collaboration with King County, because now we're going to be hearing from a different county perspective. Really happy to have Mary Jane Brell Vujovic. I practiced your last name and now I keep messing it up, but I do apologize. We're really happy to have you here. Mary Jane is the Human Services Director for Snohomish County. So really appreciate you being here and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to come talk with you about what we are doing in Snohomish County. And what am I doing?
Sorry, click on this screen somewhere.
Up
here?
Okay, we're trying to get the okay. Display settings to duplicate slideshow. Okay, I need technical assistance always to get going on this. So I know that we're running a little bit behind and that we all want to leave time for questions and answers. So I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this if that is okay. Here in Snohomish County, I want to first start by saying that all of what we do aligns with David's 3 S's that PSRC has outlined. We also really are in total sync with what Kim was saying from Paulsbo. There is no one approach. And if there's any one message I would take away from this presentation, it is there's no one approach to addressing homelessness, and not all people have different pathways to get from where they are to where they want to go. We also, what I can also confirm with what Amanda had to say, that the continuum is not always a line where you just go from step A to step B to step C. Again, that can be very fluid, and the economic conditions in which we're working can be very fluid and different. The solutions that worked best in 2008 are very different than the solutions that work best in 2026. So the first thing we do is start with what is the scope of the need, and we start with that housing characteristics and needs report. That is our housing element report. That's part of the continuum plan update. Granted, it takes a much bigger picture. So why do we look at it? Because that includes both the need for emergency shelter is listed in that report, as is and what those needs are. And as you can see, those are substantial between now and 2024. And also because it's giving us information about how many people are at that 0 to 30% AMI. Basically, that is a population that is at risk of homelessness without additional subsidies and in some cases services. So always critical to be looking at that. I know that with 1220, every jurisdiction is struggling with, oh my gosh, how do we do this? But at least it gives us a point to be aiming toward what we need to be doing. Who are the people experiencing homelessness in Snohomish County? Our point in time count is, of course, you've heard others talk about this too. It is the 1-day count. It is not a complete and accurate picture. In any given year, we probably have 9,000 people moving through our coordinated entry system, which is the front door to many of the housing services for people at risk of experiencing homelessness, although not everybody. So there's a lot of people moving, coming into contact with that system. As you can see, looking at this report, that basically about half the people, a little less than half the people, not unlike the numbers you saw for Paulsbo, of people experiencing homelessness have behavioral health challenges, which can include mental health challenges or substance use disorder challenges, or in many, many cases both. But about half the people experiencing homelessness don't. That doesn't mean they don't need services, but they don't need the same services as those who are. So, and I think that is something that, we can tend to have all the oxygen taken out of the room by a single population, and yet there's diverse people experiencing homelessness in our communities. So I will also point out that in Snohomish County, our numbers went up slightly this past point in time count that was done in January, but the numbers of unsheltered homeless people went down, and the number of sheltered people who are counted in the count, people in shelter and transitional housing, went up, which is actually an expression of an increase in capacity and a pretty stable flow through in terms of who is experiencing homelessness out there. Next slide. Looking at the entire broader perspective of needing more affordable housing, because all getting people off the streets involves with having some way to put a roof over people's heads. The executive convened our heart, which was the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force, which did a lot of educational activities. He convened that in 2019, and they did a lot of educational activities and discussion, and created a report in 2020 about what were the most urgently needed actions that they felt needed to be taken to start looking at meeting that gap at all income levels, but including 0 to 30, and for getting people who are experiencing homelessness off the streets. So they can, you can see that they, working with the housing authorities was a key component. You heard about House Bill 1590. At the time we did this, 1590 had not been passed. The House Bill 1406 had been passed. We put them together into a single fund after 1590 was passed. And so that is, as you've heard from the other jurisdictions, absolutely critical source of resources for that third S on the PSRC document. Lobbying for changes in the state and federal law and advocating for changes that enable more consolidated and streamlined funding. Review and consider recommendations for existing toolkits to engage communities. As you heard, certainly from Kim, nothing happens without all the partners in an area being able to come together. And even if that's not a total consensus, at least agreeing on a path forward. Foster community conversations about density, which is a lot of that work then wound up being done through the 2024 comprehensive plan planning process, as well as plans about how to spend those additional housing resources. Engaging the private sector and confirming and supporting ongoing structure for regional collaboration. That's really critical. This group was put together initially as a task force to produce a report, and that was really its primary charge. And so what we needed to do was move that work forward. Okay, so the report was completed in January of 2020, and then COVID hit 2 months later. They actually made a lot of progress forward in moving these action items forward, in spite of that, although not at the pace that any of us would have liked to have seen, but that it did pick up after COVID. And this work was then moved to Snohomish County tomorrow, which is this county's interjurisdictional planning body that oversees the production of the comprehensive plan and the countywide planning process policies. So that all this work has moved forward to continue. So it's not just shelf art, it's ongoing continuous work. And that body, again, looking at the comprehensive plan, what is in that, and how to utilize that work to move this work forward, how to utilize other planning processes that have involved community voices, comprehensive plan, certainly being one of those. Also, though, the planning process for that, what we call the Housing and Behavioral Health Capital Fund, which includes $1590 and $1406, involved an extensive community planning process, as did our continuum of care planning document. Amanda talked quite a bit about the one that they have in Kirkland. There's a large body of community voices that went into the development of that plan for this county too. Looking at all these documents, the Snohomish County tomorrow did determine that housing was one of its 4 top priority items, and affirmed that they want to work on those 8 action items established by the HART Committee, and are now in the process of forming a housing subcommittee to do a deeper dive into all of this work. We also, I just wanted to call out that while that's not a central focus of the work of the Snohomish County tomorrow, they've also established as a priority health and human services. And one of the key things that this county has been working on, because we have another 0.1% from the Technical Defense and Mental Health Sales Tax Fund, and that is we utilize those funds, and now, of course, opioid settlement funds, to collaborate with public health and law and justice to engage in a wide variety of activities. really looking at the sequential intercept model for how do you once the law and justice system is engaging somebody, what are the ways in which we can give them off ramps into services that help them move more quickly into back into community re-engagement. So all of these things come together into trying to form an ecosystem here in Snohomish County that involves, we are looking as a part of looking at transportation and parks and natural environment and capital facilities, housing, land use. Of course, land use underpins everything. This is why it's so great there's so many planning and development services folks here today. And all of these different plans feed into how do we address housing is one of those things that we need to address and deal with in the comprehensive plan. So in Snohomish County, we've really had a history of innovation in terms of how we go about trying to address these issues. And between 2008 and COVID and the situation we're in today, that becomes a fluid process, but there are a lot of things that have been built out and endure as sort of underpinnings for that. I think you heard about in more detail about what some of the other the cities are doing in this arena, but new theory of action that is not so linear, that to the extent possible, we have a coordinated entry point into the system, although not into shelter. The coordinated entry system, you can move from shelter into the coordinated entry system. Navigators, you heard about navigators from other jurisdictions. Scout is the Snohomish County outreach team, and there are also city outreach teams going on. You heard something about how those teams work, street outreach teams in other jurisdictions. We created a diversion center so that people who, which is a place where people can be, it's actually a repurposed wing that was formerly used of the old jail, where for up to 44 people at a time can be staying temporarily. So they have a home base from which to go out and look for other services, including housing. They also, people who are being released from jail who don't have a home can be go to the diversion center. It's adjacent to the Carnegie Resource Center, which is a place where a whole bunch of different providers are there. So somebody doesn't have to take a lot of time every day moving around from one location to another to try to get resources and services, but they have one place where they can be working on doing that. There are some safe parks in the county. The county ourselves does not fund those, but we have cities that do, and certainly in partnership with churches. Some of the cities have stood up pallet shelter communities. We have graduated shelters, and these are being built out and expanded. So from the traditional, you come for one night and you have a mat on the floor to being able to really progress into more stable housing situations. And we have a process we call creative resolution. If somebody's not already on the streets, or even if they are, what are the creative things that our staff can work with them on doing through motivational interviewing to help them resolve their issue if we can't help connect them either to a housing voucher or housing right away. So those are some of those innovations. And with the introduction of 1590 funds and the American Recovery Act funds, we were able to introduce a new service model for us. And it's still a little bit different than other jurisdictions, and that is the emergency bridge housing model. I will say that our first emergency bridge housing ribbon cutting, we've got 2 of these, will be taking place on Monday in Edmonds. So this model could not happen without, back to Kim's point, without community being involved with the mayors, the city councils, the neighbors around where these facilities are. It's absolutely critical that we could all move forward in this work. So what are they? They're referred to in Snohomish County. We've named them New Start Centers, and they really are designed as a temporary facility. The county went out and with COVID money, bought 2 motels to retrofit, and a lot of retrofitting went on in those facilities, and they're each now being operated by a different provider. So after the county managed all the general contractor and all the work to get these facilities retrofitted, we've since turned over the keys to the operators, the Salvation Army in Everett and the YWCA Seattle King Snohomish in Edmonds. And they're very experienced providers. Both of them have operated shelters and operated vouchering programs, both of which are very critical for meeting the need. So it's really designed to be a bridge. It's unlike the Stanton Center in in Kirkland, this is not viewed as a permanent place, but as a place where you can stop, breathe, catch your breath, develop a plan, and start working, or come in with a plan and really start working on that plan in more detail from a safe, stable place where you can do that. It's really intended to help people navigate their complex needs that move people towards permanent housing placement, which is the ultimate goal for all of these. While they are classified at the federal level as emergency shelters, there are ways in which they are different from many standard emergency shelters. Again, as is stand place, they're accessed by referral only. And right now we're starting with a relatively small number of referral partners, and many of those are first responders and law and justice partners, as well as established community partners. The referral partners have a lot of responsibility. They're letting folks know what the requirements are. They're intended for clients who are already connected to services and are actively engaged with their referral partner, who is oftentimes following along with them, both through this into permanent housing. Even though they're getting a lot of other providers and helpers along the way, they still have that initial attachment. Sustained attachment is critical to help people move forward in their lives. And they have a more structured, restrictive environment than many emergency shelters. They are not, however, recovery houses, certified recovery housing. This is, one of them is about 70 some beds, the other is 44 beds, I believe. And these are rooms that people are in, that they have their own rooms. And so it's not operating on a recovery housing model, but people are expected to have individual and personal plans that they are working on while being in the center. So New Start Center in Edmonds, we purchased the building in August of 22. A lot of time in terms of retrofitting that. That's March 2025, the YWCA was selected as the operator, and 26 Snohomish County approved that contract. And from March to present, they have been hiring the staff to be working in that. Construction was finished and the YWCA took occupancy in May. I will say there were a lot of small change orders that came through once they came in, and actually were able to shake out some of that. Again, on Monday, there will be a ribbon cutting event. And in July, they will start accepting referrals from those key referral partners. There is a slow ramp up, so filling the facility, so that it's over the course of 4 months that they have a chance to really kind of work slowly on building that out. The Everett facility was purchased also in August of 2022. Salvation Army was selected as the operator in November, and also approved in January of this year. The Salvation Army has been hiring and training staff. There's this building, or this property, has 2 phases. There's a sort of phase 1 property in the front and phase 2 in the back. Phase 1 has now been completed and they have taken occupancy. We anticipate the ribbon cutting for that in August. They'll start when they also start accepting referrals, with also a 4-month ramp up period. So to be eligible, people need to meet certain criteria. This is a facility for adults, that they are at least 18 at or below 50% of the area median income. I think others have pointed out many people on the streets are working already. They just aren't earning enough to afford rent anywhere, and are able to manage their activities of daily living. This is something that in a lot of this is a key component of looking at what kinds of facilities are people moving to. People who cannot manage their activities of daily living. They cannot, for example, shower, brush their teeth, take their medications, etc., because of various sort of conditions. These facilities aren't designed to be the adult living facilities for folks in that situation. So we have other pathways that we work on for folks who cannot manage their activities, daily living, where they can get the appropriate level of care and support. While there's a lot of services, they are not at that particular type of service in these. County Council really kind of, we went back and forth to land with what they must not have a conviction with the last 5 years of the manufacture, distribution, of a controlled substance, a violent crime, be a registered sex offender, and substance use. Really, This, at least to start, this facility is not taking people who have used substances within the past 30 days. That's not based on testing, but on the knowledge of the service provider and the individual self-support. And that includes legal substances like alcohol and marijuana, although cigarettes and nicotine are allowed in designated areas, not in individual rooms. All the rooms do have individual smoke detectors. So referral process, the eligibility requirements were approved by the council. They will be being reassessed by the council, and only council can approve changing them. They'll only come through approved referral partners. That list may expand, but at least to start. And they'll go to the New Start Center of Site Operators, that is Salvation Army or the YWCA, who will actually make the final decision about what to do. And here's just kind of like how that, some of the gory detail steps in that referral process and what the referral partner is doing before they get to the center. What are the lessons learned we've learned from all of this? I spent more time on the New Start Centers, and I know I just flew through all of this, but wanted to just kind of, because a lot of the lessons we've learned are the lessons other people learned. Excuse me, let me go back a slide. So there's not enough housing. We know there's not enough housing, and there's not enough behavioral health facilities, and we need an innovative, and I will add to, for Kim's point, a community response that is not one size fits all, but really looks at everybody individually. Community partners advisory boards play a key role. You cannot do it without it. For us, it is the Chemical Dependency Mental Health Advisory Board, Partnership to End Homelessness, the Housing Consortium of Everett and Snohomish County, all of our community partners. They have to really help guide that innovation and that approach. And innovation isn't a one and done. It is looking at the situation you're in and constantly adjusting for what's actually happening on the ground. And it's enhanced and not hindered by many voices and points of view. Although, boy, sometimes that is, I will not sugarcoat that, an interesting and challenging process. It's important to ask how a given approach or strategy adds to and helps balance the ecosystem. It's critical to prevent one issue from monopolizing all the oxygen. I think this is one of the key issues we face in government. When you don't have enough resources to help everybody get what they need when they need it, how do you balance those needs? You could spend all your resources on a handful of people, but that may not be the best situation, especially getting some of the numbers that we have been looking at here. And it's important to think of context. What is needed and when? As I've mentioned a couple of times, the system needs to be flexible to respond to changes in economic and social conditions, and they're beyond our control and scope. But you still have to be able to go, what's happening right now? Did we anticipate the housing crisis of 2008? Did we anticipate COVID? You know, you need to be able to look at what's happening in the here and now and constantly adjust. And the last thing I want to say is it takes time. We didn't get here overnight, and we won't address our challenges for the needs to help people get off the streets and into a safe and stable place to call home. But we need to think in terms of progress rather than assume the fault is in ourselves. I'm sorry, ordinarily I'm at the Shakespeare Festival this time of year, and that it represents failures. The only failure for us would be not trying. You got what I got. Thank you.
Wonderful. Mary Jane, thank you so much. And also congratulations on your ribbon cutting that's happening on Monday. Really excited for Snohomish County. Yeah, we ran out of time for a Q&A, but it is so worth it when we have great presenters that have so much really interesting information to share. And I do just want to highlight that everybody's presentations are available online on the PSRC website. So I dropped that link in the chat. Michaela, at this time, we can go ahead and just launch that kind of final poll here. And I'm just going to share my slide with a couple of reminders and some information about the AICP credits, if that is something you're interested in. Mark your calendars. Once again, September 25th will be our next toolbox session. Wanted to throw out another reminder for this housing tool launch that's happening next month. Again, that link is in the chat. And then finally, just really wanted to thank all of our wonderful panelists for joining us. Thank you to everybody on the call watching. Here's some information about the AICP credit, if that's something you're interested in claiming. And Yeah, that's really all I have. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you so much, all.